Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Brexit Party press launch. And here we are, Friday, the 1st of November. And regrettably, we're still a member of the European Union. For the third time, the Tories have failed to deliver Brexit on the date promised and pledged. Hundreds, if not thousands of times, Conservative Prime Ministers have promised we would be leaving the European Union. The truth is now just dawning on the country today, this morning, that the Conservative Party is unable to deliver Brexit on their own. And finally, we now have the general election that this country needs to sort out this zombie parliament. Now, the Brexit Party, of course, is just 6 months old, and we've already had a huge, significant impact on politics here in the UK, and we have a major, major role to play in the outcome of this general election. Millions of voters across the country feel utterly let down by the two main political parties and the established political class. They say imitation is a form of flattery, so I did chuckle earlier this week to hear a former leader of the Conservative Party say that they were now the Brexit Party. Let me tell you, they are not. Far from it. The Brexit Party is about common sense policies, sound common sense with competent people across the whole political spectrum. It's not a question of left or right, it's a question of common sense. We stand for a high growth, low tax, smartly regulated economy. That is the opportunity that a proper Brexit can deliver. And we stand on a simple slogan: change politics for good. And changing politics needs to start here, in this stinking, rotten borough of Westminster. The shambles of the parliamentary games here in Westminster in recent weeks and months highlights the need for major political reform. And it's only the Brexit Party that can be trusted on that political reform because, of course, we're not part of the political status quo. Firstly, we need to reform the electoral system. The first-past-the-post system hasn't delivered strong and stable government. It disenfranchises millions and millions of voters up and down the country. They vote, but their vote doesn't count. And millions of other voters don't bother to vote because they know that their vote does not count. We need a system of proportional representation. It is clearly needed, and it is needed now. The second area of reform is that we need to reform the House of Lords. We need to abolish it and start again with a much smaller, elected second chamber. The third area of political reform that we've seen is essential is the issue of members of Parliament changing parties almost at leisure. I mean, it's become a complete merry-go-round this year. Some of them, I've lost count actually, of how many times people like Chucker have changed their party. It is ridiculous. Voters should be able to use the existing recall system so that constituents can have their say if their MPs change political parties. The fourth reform, and we in the Brexit Party have seen this, is to our voting system, which is open to fraud, intimidation, corruption, and huge abuse. Before it was changed in the early 2000s, about 2% of people who genuinely needed to exercise a postal vote had the right to a postal vote. It's now over 20% nationally. In the Peterborough by-election, it was some 29%. We need to go back to the system that was tried and tested and trusted. And the fifth area of reform, again we've just seen from recent activity, is the issue of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is now a political court. And if you're going to have a political court, then that actually needs to be open with the judges, the appointment of judges needs to be open to proper scrutiny. It begs the question, do we now need a written constitution if we're going to have a political court of judges? These are big, vitally important issues, some of which need to be determined and discussed and debated across the whole country by the people in referendums. Now, the Brexit Party, we believe that there is a huge range of areas that requires significant, massive investment for our country. Now, we announced back in June that we can raise £200 billion by three simple measures. Firstly, if we scrap HS2, we save £100 billion. And we were delighted to hear that the Conservative Party have started to copy our policy by announcing a review of HS2, which may lead to scrapping it. Secondly, we should not be sending £39 billion to Brussels. Indeed, the House of Lords report confirmed that. In addition to that £39 billion, Brexit Party MEPs discovered that actually our own civil servants in Brussels, they left another £7 billion of our taxpayers' money on the table over there in Brussels because they didn't understand how to get it back from the European Investment Bank. Utter incompetence. Thirdly, we need to redirect 50% of the bloated, wasteful foreign aid budget back in to UK public services that need them so much. And we want to use this £200 billion that could be saved and reinvested. Firstly, we need to invest £100 billion in the regions that are left behind, in local road and rail schemes that are oven-ready. That would be far, far more beneficial to millions and millions of commuters and people who would use it in their daily lives than HS2. Secondly, we need to invest billions in digital infrastructure. Domestic broadband, the base level speed of domestic broadband, should be free for everyone. It is now literally a vital personal utility. All public transport, buses, trains, tubes, trams, should all have free Wi-Fi. It's not fair. It is simply not fair that you only get that on the London Tube and a few fast trains. We need to invest in young people. We need to scrap all interest on student loans. It's absurd to have an interest rate for students of over 6% when the government is borrowing 30, 40-year money at under 1%. But as or more importantly, bearing in mind that more young people do not go to university, we need a proper, simple, workable apprentice scheme that is usable by employers. Unlike the current scheme, the apprenticeship levy, introduced by this government, that is so complicated that actually it's led to a complete collapse of new apprenticeships. We need to invest in our high streets, vital parts of communities. So we should have, we believe and propose, there should be zero business rates for high street retailers and leisure operators on the high street, which would be offset by a small online sales tax. It's unacceptable in our communities, towns and villages that are damaged by having swathes of empty shops. We need to bring life back into our high streets. We'll be announcing later on in the campaign plans to help entrepreneurs and small businesses with tax incentives. They are a vital bedrock of our economy. Crucially, we need to invest in fishing and our coastal communities. If we leave with a clean break Brexit, that is a huge opportunity for more jobs, more investment, more tourism in some of the most deprived areas around the country. And this Conservative government is simply not telling the truth when they say, under Boris's deal, that they are getting back of our waters. They are not. We need to invest in the environment. We need to plant tens of millions of trees to capture CO2. And we need to invest in recycling our waste in this country. It is morally indefensible that we pay other countries to take our waste, to be put in landfill or burnt, or worse still, as my own son saw in Asia, on the beaches of Vietnam, to see plastic from the United Kingdom discarded, piled up, huge piles of plastic bottles from the UK, clogging up Asian seas. It is totally indefensible. We have to change that. We need to invest in health and social care. And amongst our own MEPs, we have superb expertise in this sector, in particular with our NHS spokesman, Dr. David Bull. We need to manage these treasured, valued, essential public services much more efficiently so that we can get better outcomes of care much, much more efficiently. We'll be releasing more details about our policies and our plans through the campaign. We know in the Brexit Party that we can cut the cost of living for people up and down the country with a proper Brexit. Leaving the customs union means that we can cut tariffs on food, clothing, and footwear. It's extraordinary that the Labour Party doesn't want to do that. We know also that leaving the customs union means that we can protect and create thousands of jobs in strategically important national industries such as steel, such as defence, and such as the railways. And we can create tens of thousands of good manufacturing jobs in free ports around the coast. And yet, the Labour Party, unbelievably, doesn't want to create these thousands of manufacturing jobs. You can't do that if you stay inside the customs union. Huge opportunities if we do Brexit properly. So that's enough from me for the moment. I'm going to invite our MEP for the southwest of England, Anne Widdecombe, to come to the lectern and carry on.
They won't see me if I come.
We have the microphone working. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. I just want to say briefly why I have joined the Brexit Party beyond the issue of Brexit itself. And I knew when that moment came, when my movement from the Conservative Party, which I'd been in for 55 years, became quite inevitable. Because it isn't just that Parliament has been a circus for the last 3 years, it has also been profoundly dishonest. Now, when I was a parliamentarian, the one rule that was unbreakable was that you did not lie to the House of Commons. If you made an honest error, you had to correct it, you had to put it on the record in the library. Honest error was one thing. We also know that politicians quite regularly are, as the expression goes, economical with the truth. But those things are completely different from an outright lie. And my moment of disillusionment came when Theresa May assured the House of Commons and the nation that her deal would not involve being trapped in the customs union forever, and she went further. She published legal advice from her Attorney General, which appeared to uphold that interpretation. Then, of course, as we all know, Parliament forced the publication of the full advice, and the opposite was true. The Attorney General had said, in black and white, that it could indeed trap us in the customs union forever. And that was the moment. That was the moment. Wasn't the circus, it wasn't the disorder, it wasn't the chaos, but that was the moment when I knew that something had to be done to regain parliamentary standards. And it's gone on. How often did Boris assure us, and the House of Commons, that he was going to make sure that we left the European Union on the 31st of October. He knew he didn't have a majority. He knew the opposition were not exactly going to cooperate. He knew the Speaker was most unlikely to facilitate any clever ideas that he had. He knew all of that, and he still stood there and said to the nation, do or die, we're leaving on the 31st of October. It was a rhodomontade of rot, and he knew it. And it's easy just to dismiss it as, oh, well, this is Boris's bombast. No, he was promising something he knew darn well right from the start that he would almost certainly be prevented from delivering. Meanwhile, within Parliament, we have seen the Labour Party put party before country, maximise the discomfort of the government at every turn, regardless of whether or not that was good, in this case, for the future of the country. And I do believe that we have rotten politics, and I'm not using that as an exaggeration, rotten politics in this country at the moment, and that one of the things we have to ensure is that Parliament is composed of people who believe in what they say, who try to tell the truth, and who are meritorious and devoted. That is what we need. And that is the sort of politics that I want to see for Britain. And that is why, quite apart from the issue of Brexit itself, I now have lost all confidence in either of the two main parties. I never had any confidence in the third. I have lost any confidence that I might ever have had that here was a major party striving for the public good. And so that is why I'm delighted to join the Brexit Party. And of course, I think it's a great honour to be here with Claire. We don't agree on much else, but we agree on that. And that is our motivation. And that is why I believe that we really can make a hugely significant difference to the way this election turns out.
Thank you, Anne. I know that you will make a huge contribution to our national campaign as we tour around the country talking to thousands, hundreds of thousands of voters across every region of the land. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome one of our other MEPs, who is the elected member of the European Parliament for the North West, Claire Fox.
Thank you both, Richard and Anne. I'm actually really excited by this election because voters now can take centre stage again, and it's about time. One of the frustrations, indeed one of the great tragedies of Brexit until now, has been, despite the fact there was an unprecedented public vote for change, a vote to renew democratic institutions and a demand for democratic accountability, Brexit was almost hijacked, owned and controlled by a technocratic establishment, and voters have been squeezed out and sidelined time and again. So it's great now to have the chance to pass judgment on a zombie parliament. But early on in this election, I think there's some evidence that the traditional parties haven't quite learnt the lessons of the Brexit vote. Firstly, we've been told that the target Tory vote is Workington man. Older, white, male, pro-Brexit. It looks like you're all in, actually, but anyway. I've been delighted to watch this latest patronising election moniker implode quite early on. The good people of Workington are furious at this attempt to put them into a caricatured straitjacket. Workington Rugby League Club has issued a statement rejecting this nonsense, and in all the vox pops so far, voters just won't confirm to type. At the very least, I think this shows that since the 2016 EU referendum, the electorate refuses to be anybody's stage army. They think for themselves, they're unpredictable, they're independent-minded. So, almost from day one, a lesson for all political parties, it seems to me, is don't take the electorate for granted. That's why it grates so much when I hear Tories, rather arrogantly, assuming that they can just rock up into northern heartlands, places they've disdained, ignored and decimated over the decades, and then simply expect that all that will be forgotten if they throw some policy trinkets and dosh at voters and then proclaim we are the real Brexit party. I find it galling to hear the Conservatives issue a command that all Leave voters must vote Tories. This seems insultingly complacent. The truth is, the Tories don't own Brexit. No party owns Brexit, and that includes the Brexit Party. Every vote in this election needs to be fought for. Every voter needs to choose whose vision of the future of post-Brexit society is most compelling. On that vision, I confess that when I hear Boris Johnson's slogan, "Let's get Brexit done," it sends a chill, because it's let's get Brexit done and then we can concentrate on the important domestic issues. My heart sinks because it suggests the Tories, like so many politicians, see Brexit as an inconvenient hurdle before going back to politics as usual. But surely that plea to go back to the traditional, same old two-party politics completely squanders the radical promise of Brexit, which at the very least was a vote to overturn the status quo. In my campaign to become an MEP, I was struck in the Northwest by the resonance for the strapline, "Change politics for good." Up and down the Northwest, I heard people proclaim that after 3.5 years of broken promises and watching the great lengths to which the Remainer elite had gone to upend their democratic principles in order to preserve their grip on power, people kept saying Brexit has to be more than just technically leaving the EU. So reverting to the status quo and a political business as usual is just not good enough. The reason to fully break from being entangled in unaccountable EU institutions is a chance to have a root and branch democratic reform, as described by Richard, from tackling the undemocratic Lords to challenging judicial overreach. Politics as usual just doesn't cut it as an inspiring vision for the transformation of British politics, as promised by Brexit. And it just seems cynical and dishonourable to exploit the understandable exhaustion and exasperation of the electorate after years of the establishment defying their mandate in order to push through, because people are tired, a minimalist get Brexit done and then go back to normal life. And as for Labour, they too want Brexit to return to their normal, which is the safe territory of Tory bashing normal. In fact, the Labour Party are keen to talk about anything but Brexit. They want to avoid it, especially to their traditional voters who voted to leave the EU in their millions. How does Labour face these voters after reneging and betraying the promise that they made themselves to uphold the referendum vote, and now becoming a fully signed up Remain party? How can Labour look those Leave voters in the eye, having so many of them traduced Brexiteers as xenophobes, ignorant, far right? Instead, Labour's strategy seems to be distraction. Anyone mentions Brexit and they say, look elsewhere, look anywhere, not there, let's talk about Brexit. And so they retreat to scaremongering about privatising the NHS or bashing billionaires or whatever. Anything rather than face their own Leave voters' wrath over their cowardice and sellout on the EU issue. But it's also hard to take Labour seriously, or Corbyn's promise to spearhead a transformative project for social change, when the Labour Party continues to cling on to the coattails of the EU project. The same EU whose whole raison d'etre is to impose a regulatory system set up to protect business interests from any disruptive change or challenge, such as Brexit, which is why big business supports Remain. Labour's radicalism is in truth rather timid. Labour's true conservatism is illustrated when it proclaims that Brexit is a blank cheque for government to tear up workers' rights, and in turn the Labour Party credits the EU with protecting said workers' rights, socially progressive rights. How insulting is that to all those British workers and trade unions and civil libertarians who have historically fought long and hard for those very rights? Let me tell you, it's not the likes of Christine Lagarde, Michel Barnier or Ursula von der Leyen who can take credit for improving working conditions in the UK over the decades. And what's more, that claim is delusional. To quote Larry Elliott from The Guardian, no less, he said, "From the earliest days, the overriding principle behind the European project has been to make life easier for capital, which is why multinational corporations like it so much." So, Mr Corbyn, can I remind you of the EU's 2015 imposition of austerity on Greece? Anyone who dared to suggest to Greek workers that they should look to Brussels to protect their rights will be given short shrift. And I think we should give short shrift to Labour when they say the same to workers here. To conclude, whether it's Labour's pessimistic lack of confidence in our own ability to take control of improving working conditions without the patronage of Brussels employment lawyers, or the Tories' defensive, minimalist message that the only choice is to get a shoddy deal over the line, both dangerously threaten to squander the promise and potential of Brexit, which is real change. So now it's time for voters to choose. And of course it's scary because that's what democracy's like. It's time for us to look voters square in the eye, to be honest and not patronise them with the usual easy election promises, but to say we have a chance here, something new. Let's do something new. Let's discuss why now is the very time to change politics for good. And in that sense, the Brexit Party is an insurgent party, is the one to watch in this election. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. It's extraordinary. What the Brexit Party has done since we launched is we've turned the anger of millions of voters into hope. Hope that actually there is the possibility of real change. There's no question that we have some of the highest quality people who've ever come into public life with our existing MEPs, but also with our hundreds and hundreds of prospective parliamentary candidates who stand ready to fight this election. And they, of course, will be led by none other than our party leader, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. It is November the 1st, and yes, we are still members of the European Union. Yet more broken promises, and indeed a breakdown of trust and faith, not just in politics, but actually in our entire democratic system in this country. And that is why I came out of political retirement to found the Brexit Party, because I thought something had gone wrong, and we'd even lost sight of what the Brexit vote was about. It was about us becoming an independent, self-governing nation. That's what people voted for, 17.4 million of them. And the sheer level of broken promises is astonishing. I mean, the Labour Party absolutely promised everybody during the campaign, after the campaign, and even in their general election manifesto that they would honour the result of the referendum and implement it. And yet, where are we now with Corbyn's Labour Party? Well, they're now promising us that if they win the election, they will go to Brussels and negotiate a new deal. They will put it to us in a second referendum, and it sounds like many of them will actually campaign against the deal their own government has negotiated. But they are offering us a choice of remain or effectively remain. And for 5 million Labour voters who turned out in that referendum back in June 16 and voted to leave, this represents nothing less than a complete and utter betrayal. It is a Labour Party that represents Islington, not Isloin, Hampstead, not Huddersfield, and Dalston, not Doncaster. And I have to say, the idea that these old Labour voters workington man, I think they're now described as, are suddenly going to vote for Boris Johnson and Boris's Conservative Party, I think is nonsense. I think we showed in those few weeks of the European elections what our potential appeal to Labour Leave voters was, because our highest scoring region was the North East, followed by, in fact, the results that took place in South Wales. So I think that the Brexit Party poses a very major problem to Labour, particularly in Wales, the Midlands, and certainly many parts of the north of England. And there are now so many Labour Leave seats represented by Remain members of Parliament that be in no doubt, in terms of winning seats, we view those constituencies around the country as being absolutely among our top targets. And perhaps to prove that point, in the course of the next week, I will be in the East Midlands, I will be up in the North East, I will be in South Wales, I will be in East London, and yes, next Wednesday I'll be in Workington as well. Something I think that was completely misunderstood the last time I did this, which was in 2015, when I led UKIP into that general election. Everyone seemed to think, media commentators, newspaper editors, that somehow, because UKIP were fielding hundreds of candidates, we would have a very negative effect on the Conservative Party. And the absolute truth of it, something that is now acknowledged by some, is that it was in fact the UKIP vote that disproportionately hurt the Labour Party in those 2015 general election. And actually, there wouldn't have been a Conservative majority if it hadn't been for the effect of the UKIP vote. So this continued lazy thinking that somehow Brexit voters are all Conservatives is nonsense. This issue is so fundamental, it crosses all normal political divides. And I am pleased that Jeremy Corbyn will no longer be able to say in this campaign that if we get Brexit, if we leave the customs union and attempt to enter into a free trade deal with the United States of America, that somehow that means that our NHS is for sale. I was talking to an American friend of mine on the radio last night who indicated that is well and truly off the table. And what of Boris Johnson's Conservatives? Well, look, I'd be the first to accept that he did inherit a very difficult position. You know, he inherited Mrs. May's appalling surrender treaty, and he did it with the clock running down to the 31st of October. And I don't doubt for a moment that he tried his best to improve it. And perhaps the one significant achievement was that Great Britain is not committed to being in the customs union. But the price of that was appalling. The price of that was Northern Ireland being hived off, which I think for him personally represented a really pretty dreadful breach of the promises that he'd made at the DUP conference the year before. But it doesn't end there, of course, because now, if this treaty passes, and I very much hope it doesn't, it will lead to massive pressure in Scotland for the SNP to campaign for the same thing. Boris tells us it's a great new deal. It is not. It is a bad old treaty, and simply, it is not Brexit. What we are doing here is kicking the can down the road for at least a further 3 years, entering into another round of agonising negotiations. And Monsieur Barnier, who, by the way, is rather more brilliant at negotiating than our side appears to have been in the last 3 years, Monsieur Barnier has set down the terms already. We are committing in an international treaty that Boris Johnson wants Parliament to vote for and for us to ratify. We are committing to negotiating for up to 3 years in line with the political declaration. And that means we're aiming for regulatory alignment. Yep, everything from financial services to fisheries would, if we do this trade deal, be tied to EU law. We will not in any way be taking back control of our laws, our money, or our borders. And I am actually grateful to President Trump for making it clear last night, doing it in a way He didn't want to hurt Boris Johnson. He's a fan of Boris Johnson. He thinks that Johnson has brought great energy to the job. But putting it very simply, that if we continue down this route, there will not be trade deals with the USA, or indeed, I don't think, any other parts of the world. Boris's deal gives us all of the burdens of EU membership, but no say whatsoever. And it will not get Brexit done. In fact, what it will do is lead to a campaign in which people say, we have no voice, we have no vote, we have no veto in the few areas that they're left. It will lead to a campaign for us to rejoin, a campaign that if it was put to a referendum, I have no doubt would actually succeed. So I want to urge Boris Johnson to reconsider the detail of what is in those two documents. And I say that because he gave an answer in the House of Commons on fisheries. He gave an answer in the House of Commons on Northern Ireland exporters to Great Britain. And both of those answers simply weren't true. And that suggests to me that in his desperate desire to get rid of the backstop, to bounce Parliament, sitting for the first time on a Saturday in 37 years, to bounce them into agreeing it, I'm not sure he's actually looked at the full details himself. A general election is a chance to press the reset button. A general election is a chance to pursue a different agenda. After all, no parliament may bind its successors. It's what we expect in general elections, in main party manifestos. So I'm going to say this to Boris Johnson: drop the deal. Drop the deal because it's not Brexit. Drop the deal because as these weeks go by and people discover what it is that you've signed up to, they will not like it. And I also am more than willing to compromise my position. You see, I've been saying for months we have to go for a clean break Brexit. And I've said that because it was the only way of delivering Brexit on the 31st of October. But if Boris said that he now wanted to go down the route of a genuine free trade agreement, along the lines perhaps of Canada or other models, and that in doing so he would not sign us up to political linkage, he would not keep the continued jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, that he would simply go for a free trade deal, he'd give a deadline of the 1st of July, and failing that, of course, we could both go to Geneva, to the World Trade Organization, under Article 24. We could leave the European Union, but have several years, in fact, to negotiate the new agreement. If Boris was to go along with that, I would view that as being a totally reasonable position. And in the interest of building a Leave alliance, I would be more than happy to back that. Of course, he would have to say that if they were being completely unreasonable, if they didn't want a free trade deal, if they weren't prepared to go to Geneva, then of course we would leave on July the 1st on WTO terms, and he would have to say it, and indeed he really would have to mean it. Either way, pursuing that route would mean not having a new EU treaty. Pursuing that route would mean not entering into negotiations on the completely impossible conditions that Barnier has set out already in the political declaration. And that really would be Brexit. I believe the only way to solve this is to build a Leave alliance across this country. And that doesn't mean just Conservatives and the Brexit Party. There are Labour figures out there that I've spoken to who would more than happily stand in this election if we could put this coalition together. But if it was done, Boris Johnson would win a very big majority. And on that manifesto, we really could get Brexit done. In fact, to quote a friend of mine, we'd become an unstoppable force. I hope and pray that after 25 years of endeavour on my part, that this works. But if it doesn't, well then the Brexit Party will be the only party standing in these elections that actually represents Brexit. And if that's the situation, there are two things that we will do. The first is to make sure that every house in this land is informed as to what is in the treaty and what is in the political declaration, what the costs of this are, what the time implications are, to make people truly understand the extent to which this is a sellout. And the second thing in those circumstances that we will do is we will contest every single seat in England, Scotland and Wales. And please don't doubt that we are ready. Don't underestimate our determination or our organisation. Indeed, next Monday we have 500 candidates coming to London and they will all be signing their candidate forms on that day, and you're all very welcome to come along and to witness that. You know, as we showed in those European elections, we are able to attract a very high quality of candidate with far more diverse backgrounds than the Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat parties. And we're doing this because, coming from all walks of life, we don't trust the establishment to deliver on their own. Indeed, if it hadn't been for Jimmy Goldsmith, the Conservatives would never have made the pledge to have a referendum before joining the euro. If it hadn't been for UKIP, there would have been no referendum on EU membership. And without the Brexit Party, we will never get a meaningful Brexit done. We are determined to deliver Brexit. We are equally determined, as you've heard earlier on this morning, that politics cannot just go back to the way that it was before. This country is crying out for genuine political reform, and we will campaign on that during this general election too, because we really do want to change politics for good. And I know inevitably you will ask me about funding. Well, I can tell you we have enough money right now for a fully funded election campaign, and by the look of the way money is coming in on our website, we will have more than enough to fight this campaign and to fight it well. Now, of course, I'm open and flexible to local exceptions. And already we are in communication with a number of MPs who are prepared to renounce the withdrawal agreement, to renounce the deal, and they themselves to stand on a ticket of a genuine free trade agreement or leave on WTO terms. And of course, in those cases where MPs say this, we will view them as our friends and not as our enemies. And more interestingly, already we're being approached to put together informal arrangements on the ground, constituencies in which they may have a better chance of winning and we won't bother to campaign, but equally constituencies in which we have got a better chance of winning and they won't campaign. And that is already beginning to come together. But that is not the real deal. The real deal is a Leave alliance that wins a big majority in Parliament. The real deal is a Leave alliance that delivers a genuine Brexit. I hope that common sense prevails over the course of the next 2 weeks. We are prepared, all of us in the Brexit Party, to put country before party, and we put that appeal out to Boris Johnson and others in the Conservative Party. Now is the right time to do this, but if they choose not to, we will stand up and do this on our own. 17.4 million people voted Brexit, and they deserve to get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So, I know Nigel's got some specific interviews with broadcasters and also with the print, but we'll have about half a dozen questions here in front of everybody. So, who'd like to start? Well, you've got your first hand up. If you say your name, where you're from, thank you very much.
Hi, William James from Reuters. You talked about what you would do if Boris didn't accept the deal. You'd stand MPs across the country. How many MPs will you stand if he does accept the deal? And also, how long's he got to consider this deal?
Well, nominations close on the 14th of November. So in theory, we've got until the 14th of November. do this. That's as good as useless. Yeah, so we've got up until the 14th of November, in theory, to do this. Look, you know, we absolutely recognise that they are a bigger party with a much bigger footprint on the ground in the constituencies than we've got, and we would be utterly and entirely sensible and reasonable. But it would be fair to say there are around about 150 seats in this country that are Labour-held constituencies that the Conservative Party have never, ever won in their history, and for cultural reasons they're not going to win at this general election. And that, I think, is how a deal of this kind would work, a non-aggression pact of this kind would work, and I think it would be to our advantage, to their advantage, but most importantly to Brexit's advantage. So all of that could be discussed, and we are, as I say, for us, despite the fact all of us on this platform in the last 6 months have put a lot of our lives into building this new political party, for us the issue matters far more than the party. This is a big moment in history, and I actually feel that we're so close to getting that majority in Parliament and to getting a real Brexit delivered. And I just really hope, as I say, that the Conservatives genuinely rethink and reconsider this. This is a one-off opportunity. If we don't get it, and if we do finish up with that withdrawal agreement, then frankly, I think it's the end of Brexit, because it's a deal that is just so bad.
Right in the back there, yes, sir. That's it.
Thank you, Ben Kentish, The Independent. Mr Farage, what conversations are going on with Boris Johnson and other members of the government about this offer that you've made today? Have you had conversations, and will you be having them in the coming days?
I think there are more conversations this morning going on between Downing Street and the White House than there are going on with us, to be honest with you. Look, we have not spoken formally to anybody about this. We've spoken informally to people in and around and close to the Prime Minister. My understanding is there are some within the inner sanctum who think this is absolutely necessary. There are others who think it's the last thing they would ever do. Others who think we'd almost rather lose and then blame the Brexit party afterwards than come to an accommodation. What I do know from the month of September, when Richard and I travelled right across the country doing a series of big public events, is that everywhere we go, we meet local associations who are absolutely desperate to do this. So I'm convinced that there's a big majority actually within the party that want to do this. Maybe one or two roadblocks in Downing Street.
Right, just to the front here.
Angus Walker, ITV News. Isn't it more realistic in terms of delivering Brexit for voters to vote Tory? Could a vote for the Brexit party actually block Brexit?
If Mr Johnson stands on the deal he did in Brussels 2 weeks ago and on implementing that treaty, that is not Brexit. And that's the point. It's not Brexit. It doesn't free us. It just kicks the can a few years further down the road. It's not Brexit. So in those circumstances, we would be the only Brexit choice. And here's Boris Johnson's problem. You know, with the sheer level of Brexit exhaustion, he comes back from Brussels and cries victory. And everyone says, oh, thank goodness for that. We've got a breakthrough, isn't it wonderful? And then it's put to Parliament, or supposed to be put to Parliament. Sir Oliver Letwin rather changed that, but put to Parliament before anyone's got time to even read it or to understand what is in it. And Boris Johnson's big problem is this. If he thinks he can survive 6 weeks on the basis of what's in those documents, without the country waking up, and without Brexiteers being appalled by it, he's got another think coming. So I think there is, as I say, a couple of weeks in which he can press the reset button on this, and I very much hope that he does. Well, look, I don't know what the likelihood is, and it doesn't have to be a pact, it can be a non-aggression pact. There are lots of different ways this can be done, but the idea of building a Leave alliance is one that I genuinely believe in.
Hi, John Johnston, Politics Home. Are you planning to stand as a candidate, and if so, in what seat?
I'm going to announce all of that in the next few days, but right now, to say what I'm doing or Richard's doing would be a massive distraction. You know, this is our big chance today to set the stage, to say we're very, very prepared to compromise, to work with other people, to build this alliance, but equally that we're ready to fight across the country. I will answer that question in 2 or 3 days' time.
Hello, Mr Farage. Paul McNamara from Channel 4 News. This is an offer which Boris Johnson is never going to be able to accept. Isn't this just a waste of 2 weeks?
Well, it's not a waste of my 2 weeks. As I said to you, we'll be signing up 500 candidates on Monday. Come along and film it, by all means. You're very, very welcome. And they will be going out into the field and campaigning. In fact, many of them are out in the field and campaigning already. I'm saying that we're going forward, we're ready, we're funded, we've got the people, we will fight this election on the basis of Brexit, political reform, and a whole other range of innovative policy issues. But we are prepared to put country before party. And in the end, it'll be up to them. I would have thought that with a strong, active Brexit party and a clear message on what we stand for, as opposed to a treaty and years more negotiations, that there comes a point within the next couple of weeks when they will say to themselves, even though we don't want to do this, even though the Conservative Party historically never does these things, actually, we've got no choice. Whether they do it out of high principle, whether they do it because they just want to win the election, I don't really care. I don't mind how it happens, I just care that it does.
Tom. Hi Nigel, Tom Newton-Dunn from The Sun. Just to make clear your terms, it would appear you're asking Boris Johnson to stand aside, not field Tory candidates in 150 seats to give you a clear run, and in exchange, you won't field candidates in every other Tory seat. Is that correct? And secondly, if he doesn't accept your terms, what is your realistic hope going head-to-head against him everywhere of how many MPs you can get? 5, 10, 50?
On the first one, Tom, look, it's a negotiation, but I've laid out what the upper end of expectations would be. All right, the very upper end. We are reasonable, sensible people. We want to get this done. In terms of winning seats, well, look, no one knows more than me how punishing the first past the post electoral system can be. I know it better than anybody, and it's difficult. The difference, Tom, this time is there are now many more seats that are 3 or 4 way marginals, where a score of 30, 31% can win seats. So I'm not going to make any silly, wild predictions, but it's going to be much easier to win seats in constituencies in this election than it's been in modern history.
We've got time for about 3 more. Kate.
Hi, it's Kate Proctor from The Guardian. Nigel, is the stumbling block to you forming this Leave alliance specifically the fault of Dominic Cummings?
I don't know is the honest truth. I'm sure he's a very charming chap and easy to work with, but I don't know. All I can say to them is this. If they really think they're going to win this election with their Workington Man proposal, they really want to get outside of the office and of London a little bit more, because they really are whistling in the wind. They need to rethink this. I find it very interesting that on the tour that Richard and I did, we did a day in Doncaster, a big event at the racecourse in the evening, and it was an area which in the European elections we topped the poll in pretty much every single constituency, or at least council area as they were counted. And 5 days later, who was in Doncaster? Boris Johnson. I think he perhaps should be spending more time in seats where they're vulnerable to the Liberal Democrats, rather than wasting his time going after the old Labour Leave vote. As I say, I don't know fully what their thinking is, but I do know, because I have had reach out from some who visit that building regularly, so there is a conversation going on.
Thank you. Andy Bell, 5 News. Mr Farage, it might not be the purest form of Brexit that you would like, but there are millions of people out there who voted for Brexit in 2016 who think they're about to get it with Boris Johnson's agreement. Aren't they entitled to say, you're the one who's now going to mess this up by potentially allowing Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street, and there'll be another EU referendum, and that will be the end of Brexit?
Well, quite often people buy used cars and the bonnet looks quite shiny and it all looks very attractive, but it breaks down rather quickly and is a disappointment in every regard. And that's exactly what Boris is trying to do. He's trying to sell a second-hand motor where he's polished up the bonnet, but actually underneath nothing has changed. This is Mrs May's appalling surrender treaty. That is what it is. And I would say this to you. Do people want resolution on this? Of course they do, and I understand that completely. But this is not Brexit. If he decides that he can go on selling this as Brexit, very good luck to him. Because I think by the time December the 12th comes along, the country will understand what's in it, will understand that it's not Brexit. We will make sure of that.
I mean, you keep saying that you are the only party fighting for a real Brexit, but there is more than a reality that you would split the Brexit vote. So do you accept that there is at least a risk that you could be the last hope of Remainers and those campaigning for a people's vote? At least a risk.
Well, I think you're right, John. I mean, I think the risk of the vote being split is very real. Very real. We saw it in Peterborough. You know, we were the lead challenger to the incumbent Labour Party, and because there was a Conservative candidate, the Labour Party won by 600 votes. It's a seat the Brexit Party would have won if the Conservatives had not split our vote. And equally, in Brecon and Radnor, which in the end became a very close head-to-head between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats won by a relatively small margin, and the Brexit Party vote, although a weak seat for us, was in double digits. There's a classic case there of two parliamentary by-elections that we've seen since the European elections that both could have gone to Leavers and both went to Remainers. So I would say this actually cuts both ways. And that's why the logic of doing a deal, and I've explained, in answering Tom's question, that we are not asking for a vast number of seats compared to what they would need. This actually works. The mathematics works. And this isn't just me. I mean, Professor John Curtis himself has looked at this and said the mathematics of this works.
Deal you do accept. Without a deal, you could be risking Brexit.
No, this deal isn't Brexit. That's the point.
Right at the back. Nigel, Theo from LBC. Just very quickly, is there a danger that Boris Johnson was to say something to you before November the 14th when nominations close, you're able to do a deal on your clean break Brexit platform, and then the manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, looks markedly different from what he promises you?
Well, he is good at changing his mind, I'll grant you that, because he's talked about Mrs May's awful surrender treaty as being vassalage, and then on the third occasion voted for it. So he does chop and change a little bit. Look, I think it's actually very simple. There is 2 weeks to put together a Leave alliance, and it needs to be done.
Last question, just here in the middle.
David Reid, CNBC. Do you think the Conservative Party is looking at the polls, and if they are, they're thinking, we don't need this offer?
Well, if they want to think that, that's absolutely fine. If they want to think that, that's absolutely fine. If they think that suddenly, after years of letting people down and breaking virtually every manifesto promise they've made at election after election, that they can stand up as the Conservative Party and all the Leave voters in the country will say, hooray, we are all going to back Boris Johnson. They don't understand the makeup of Brexit voters in this country. No one party owns the Brexit vote, and that even includes the Brexit Party. This is something that crosses all traditional loyalties and divides, and it's why the only way to get Brexit done is to form a Leave alliance and to win this election with a big, stonking majority.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That concludes the formal part of proceedings. I know we've got some individual interviews and things booked, so thank you very much indeed.